So first of all, I'd like to thank everybody. I'm assistant professor at MD Anderson in Houston, Texas, and originally from Ohio State, so I did my undergrad in medicine training at. So first of all, I'd like to thank Barbara for inviting me, and for all of you inviting me to come here. So I appreciate that opportunity. And the second thing I'd also like to thank, probably from the rest of the country, for all of Arizona, is thank you for beating Duke in the NCAA basketball tournament. So I have to get that out there, so thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. So really the focus of my talk today is going to be a two-part focus. One, I know there's a wide variety of patients here, from newly diagnosed to smoldering myeloma to really having more relapse disease. So really what I want to focus is really going a little bit of background about what clinical trials are, and really some ABCs about what clinical trials are and why they're important and what they are. And then we'll talk about some of the new drugs that are available and that are in current clinical trials now. So I think really the basic definition of a clinical trial is really a clinical trial is a research study that involves people. So it doesn't involve rat or other cell lines or other machines. It's really clinical trials or research studies that involve people. And they're really designed to find better ways to prevent disease, diagnose disease, or treat a disease. And really participation for all clinical trials is completely voluntary. There's a couple of different clinical trials out there, and it's important to understand all of them. There's clinical trials that are prevention clinical trials to prevent healthy patients from developing cancer. So we'll have patients with, for example, with colon cancer prevention trials where they're taking aspirin or other medicines like that to prevent colon cancer. We're not talking about those trials today. There's early detection and screening trials to how to figure out early detection or screen or pick up the cancers early. There's diagnostic trials to how to figure out better ways to diagnose patients. And there's other quality of life and improvement supportive care trials. And those are really designed to help people feel better, deal with some of the side effects that you deal with when you're taking chemotherapy. The trial that I'll be focusing on mostly today is therapeutic trials. And so therapeutic trials are really trials that are designed, there's multiple different types of learning about new drugs or how to use new drugs, how to use new drug combinations in the best and safest way possible to really advance medicine and advance taking care of patients with myeloma. Anytime you have any of these types of clinical trials, it's important to understand there's a tremendous amount of regulation. And so I think that's an important part for all patients to understand that there's multiple layers of oversight, both from the local institutional level with scientific committees, institutional review boards that review these to make sure they're ethical and they're safe and they're answering important scientific questions. There's third-party monitors and auditors who are making sure the trials are done appropriately. And there's also FDA oversight as well. So there's multiple layers of oversight, which I think provides a layer of comfort to us as well as the patients that these trials are done appropriately and safely and in the best intent for the patients. So when we talk about clinical trials, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what types of trials there are. Sorry, I'm going backwards. There we go. Sorry. So there's a couple of different types of therapeutic clinical trials out there. There's phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trials. And I really want to kind of help define what those are for everybody. So a phase 1 trial is basically a trial that looks at a new drug or a new drug combination. So this may be a brand new drug that we haven't used or have little experience with, or a new drug combination to really evaluate the safety of that combination, the safety of that drug, and what's the right dose and how do we give it the best way. It gives an early idea of efficacy, but it's really designed as a safety thing to find what's the safest dose for patients. And they usually start off at very, very low levels and then go up. A phase 2 trial is when you have an idea of what the safe dose is, but then you want to get a better idea of how active this drug is. You know, you think it works and you just want to get a better idea of how active it is. After a phase 2 trial, once you get a signal saying this is a pretty active combination, then you want to commit to a larger phase 3 trial. And that's basically a large trial. We compare an old standard of care regimen that we think is the best regimen and see if this new one is better, either both by efficacy, so it's better tolerated, so it's less side effects, or if it's more active. So one of the kind of misnomers that we understand about phase 1 trials is that these phase 1 trials are really at the end of the road when you have no other options, and that's really a bad thing when your doctor says phase 1 trial. And really, in fact, that's not the case. And so phase 1 trials can in fact be when you're looking for new drugs. And so we can be looking at new drugs, and so if you're looking at carfilzomib or pomalidomide, they all start off in phase 1 trials. It's important to understand that there can also be new drug combinations. So for example, if you have lots of experience with Revlimid, and you have lots of experience with Velcade, but if you want to combine them together for the first time, you start off from scratch and start off with a phase 1 trial combining the two. So it doesn't automatically mean if you say phase 1 trial, it's a brand new drug you've never heard of. This could just be two drugs that you haven't used together before that you just want to make sure that's safe to combine. It can also be done in new settings as well. So for example, if you have Revlimid that's approved in relapsed but not approved in newly diagnosed, you still have to do early phase 1 trials to make sure it's safe in this new patient setting if you go from relapse to maintenance to newly diagnosed. And the same thing holds true if you have a drug that's approved for another cancer indication. So we have drugs that are approved for lymphoma or Waldenstrom's that we may want to cross over and use in myeloma. You have to really start from scratch and start off with phase 1 trials or early phase trials to really prove it's safe and effective for these patients as well. So a couple other myths other than what we talked about with phase 1 trials. Patients are often concerned that there's some other motive for physicians putting patients on trial. And I want to reassure you that the institution or the physician does not make money as part of this, and this is really, we do get funding from sponsors or from the government, and this has really helped to pay the research nurse or data coordinators or do some of the scientific questions that we're trying to answer. So it doesn't help the physician at all by any stretch. We also have to understand that sometimes patients are afraid of being guinea pigs or being on a placebo or sugar pill. So if you're going to be on a placebo-controlled trial, that's something that your physician will talk to you about. Is this trial have a placebo arm in there? And most trials will not unless it's farther along in the phase 3 trials. And at that point in time, you're going to get the best standard of care plus or minus this new drug. So you won't be getting just a placebo by itself, and that would be very rare that you'll see something like that. And again, this last thing that we talked about, this concept of phase 1 trials. Oops, sorry. I'm not staying up with my slides here. And this last concept of phase 1 trials really being considered only if nothing else is available, and that's a bad thing. And unfortunately, that's not the case, and you will use phase 1 trials at really any point in the setting from newly diagnosed to relapsed. So again, why should I participate in a clinical trial? What are the benefits for me? I think it's important, I think we all understand the importance of this, that really myeloma is a rare cancer, it's 1% of all cancers, but there's been a tremendous amount of progress in the last 10 years, and I'll show you this next slide. And really the major progress in the last 10 years, and Dr. Kyle pointed this out as well, these multiple new drugs that have been approved. And why have these new drugs been approved? I think it's multifactorial. One is researchers doing research. There's the government supporting this with NIH or government funding. But then it's also in large part driven by yourself and by patients and patient support groups. Because if you think about breast cancer having a whole lot of support and lots of money that's generated, that's what drives this. So I think there's been a tremendous amount of kind of enthusiasm from patients and patient support groups, and that translates to participating on clinical trials, and that's really what led to development of these new drugs. And ultimately, this will hopefully help you and hopefully help future patients as well. And this is what I was getting at